The real pandemic that we've been dealing with, not just in the past year, but for the past several decades, has been narcissism. And I think the pandemic really brought that out, because when people would ask me, how will we overcome this distrust? How will we think about, pulling together and trusting science? I said, well, a war, a depression, or a pandemic will probably shake us out of it. And I was wrong. A pandemic deepened it. It encouraged people to say, well, I'm going to do my own research. And after 5 minutes of Googling, I know all about vaccinations and RNA and epidemiology. And it brought out the very worst traits of an already deeply narcissistic culture. There is a real selfishness and self-absorption and narcissism that has come with living in a country that is peaceful, prosperous, affluent, super high standards of living, technological innovations that we now just take for granted, that, things just work. Cars. I mean, when I was a kid, car trouble was a really common excuse. I had car trouble, and people say, I know what you mean. Cars just work today. They just do. We are used to those kinds of things. We are used to having even air conditioning, which was an unthinkable luxury for, kids in my generation. Because of all that, we've become very self-absorbed, and our world has kind of collapsed down to this kind of villager mentality. What's good for me and what's good for my family is good, and I don't really have to care about anybody else. I think that's poisonous, not just for international cooperation, but I think it's poisonous for democracy.
So what are the things that you would like to see happen in the United States that you think would start to move the needle back towards less mutual hostility and more ability to discuss issues reflecting what the population actually thinks?
More turnout and more attention among American citizens to state and local elections. Radicalism begins at home. When people are concerned about things like gerrymandering, voter suppression, in part this happens because one of the big divisions in American politics is that the right shows up for every election down to dog catcher, and the American left has become obsessed with the White House and the assumption that if you can just win the presidency, you solve all the problems in a top-down way. So the very first thing, I think we need to have a serious discussion and a serious voter turnout effort about turning out in state and local elections. To me, that would obviate many of the problems that we face in America. We would get a more representative government. We would get a less partisan government, and one that more, I think, reflects more of the average American's wants and needs. The second thing I think we need to do is that we have to somehow disconnect. And again, I don't think we can do this through policy. I don't think we can mandate it. We have to convince people to somehow disconnect from the constant sensory stream of political messages that are pumped through their televisions and through their computers. And, that sounds hypocritical from me, right? I am, on morning television or an evening news show. But I think that we have to return to some sense of a balanced diet where we are not constantly having 220 volts of pure political energy coursing through our body 24 hours a day. And that has to start with people just disconnecting.